We'll take about 20 minutes or so for questions. The hour is late, and now is where I must needs go through Samaria, which is my horizontal position, and we'll be back tomorrow morning. But if are there microphones here? Yes, there's one here and one there. Please feel free to go up to that, and if you'll keep your question brief and one to a person, we'll get to as many as we can. Yes, sir.
First of all, thank you so much. And just briefly, you raised the concern of kids going down into the basement and allowing a total stranger on the TV to capture their attention. And that was pretty ominous for me. I work with kids, and I also just became a new father. So my question is, how do we counteract the influence of the media and the enemy's influence through the media? And what are some things that we can be doing to counteract that and positively influence children, especially?
It's the biggest challenge I think we are going to face. When you saw, for example, going into the 70s and 80s, when an organization, say like Youth for Christ, began to struggle with drawing audiences into their rallies or whatever it was, what was actually happening was kids were being lost much earlier in a much deeper way, so that by the time they were 16, 17, and 18, they were so far gone that it was a salvage operation, and things like the ordinary programs that we were doing weren't attracting them anymore. They were being lost at the age of 11, 12, 13. And what was happening was that this privatized world in which all the input that they needed was coming to them, and what loomed before them was all the possibilities in their own little private world. This year I'm celebrating 40 years in itinerant ministry. And if I had to do it all over again, even I would do it differently, though I started in the 70s. But certainly now I wouldn't do it the same way, because you're away from your kids so much. And you say, what are the years that I have lost in the process? By God's grace, all of my 3 children are now working with me, and that's just a credit to their mother's hard work and the grace of God. So I'm just overwhelmed and thrilled to see them walking with God. But if I still had to do it all over again, I would do it very differently to the way I did it then, with the hours and all gone from them. Now, what I want to say to you is this: because of the nature of the resistance of the human heart, I had a young woman in her high teens come to see me last weekend with her father. And it is interesting how deeply they are getting entrenched into an anti-Christian state of mind with their questions. These are kids whom have been raised in the church, but suddenly say they can't believe this anymore. The answer is not simple, but they'll bring together many factors that have to be borne in mind. And one of them is this: time. Time with the young ones, because you cannot work with your timetable to teach truth. You have to work with their timetable to be available to what I call incidental instruction that's not designed by sit across the couch from me, I'm going to tell you now what to believe. The incidental nature of instruction is going to have to be coming to the fore, whether it's taking them to a ball game, whether it's taking them to something they enjoy doing, but you're right there and having fun in the process, and the instruction is coming, which may seem incidental, but is actually framing the character of this person at that time. Time is an indispensable component. Location is very critical. It's no longer I, you, now you listen to me, I'm going to tell you. It doesn't work anymore. You have to find the receptive mind at a receptive time, and that is often dictated by them. You can't suddenly jump into this. Groom this relationship early. Whether it's a telephone call every day to the young one, whether it's a text message or an email every day, whether it's a word that I say, I love you, so that they learn to get attached and in need of that affirmation, so that if it's ever gone from them, they will truly miss it and long for it. So it has to start early, it has to be on a continuous basis, and it has to be incidental to the locations in which they are very comfortable. The other thing I want to say is, they get very tired of a judgmental approach of instruction. Be very careful. You have to angle into application. You cannot go to it in your face. And the last thing I would say encourage them greatly to be readers, the cyber world notwithstanding. The better readers they are, the more input goes into the mind in a way that gives their imagination sovereignty over the content. The visual becomes sovereign over your mind. The audible or the scripted gives them their own imagination strength, and the ideas can then provoke greater truths and greater ideas. So I would say, as a young dad, take your responsibility very seriously, and don't neglect it, because the years will go by very, very quickly.
Thanks.
We'll go alternately, maybe. Yes, sir.
When you meet someone who is embedded in a relativistic and synchronistic worldview, what is the first thing you say or ask that person to help to dislodge his thinking, to help him to realize that his viewpoint really doesn't make total sense? And
Well, I appreciate the way you framed your question, because really it's more important to ask than to tell. Very important to ask that person. The entry point of a discussion is determined by the answers to questions, not just answering unasked questions. If you ask a person a question, why you believe this, what you believe, and so on and so forth, as time goes by, you will begin to understand how this person is really thinking. And there comes a point in every person's belief, or a sensitive nerve at a certain point. To just argue against relativism, many of them will just walk away saying, yeah, but that's the way it is, that's what I believe, thanks a lot for your absolutist worldview, but you can have it, it's not for me. But if you listen carefully, sooner or later a relativist will make a pronouncement against somebody else. And you say to the person, why do you think that's wrong? And the more they open up, they will tell you they have some fundamental assumptions about life, where sooner or later individual human dignity is assumed. An assumption that cannot be made in a naturalistic framework. So I would say, just be a friend to that person, ask the right questions, show interest. One of the reasons the East has trumped the West, they understood us better than we understood them. They read our languages, they read our books, they read our philosophers. We never bothered anyone of that stuff. And so when we started talking to them about their worldview, some of them could stop and say, now what is it you know about my scriptures, really? Have you ever opened the Gita or ever read any of this? And so in an institution like this, when those of you who are going to ministry, particularly even heading out to business, take your course on world religions very seriously. Understand what it is people believe, why they believe it, and it's not just the doctrine side of it. There is a popular side of all of these things. So I would say, rather than asking them a question first, answering their questions first, I ask them a lot of questions. And one by one, you begin to find they will open up at a point at which you can, sometimes a sharing of your own conversion story, sometimes being there in the time of grief, being there in the time of hurting. When Job's friends went, the problem was that they opened their mouths. Had they not opened their mouths, they would have been received much better over a long period of time. And at the end of it, he had to pray for them because of all the answers they had, without ever pausing to ask him how he was really feeling about this, how he was coping through that. So I would say there's a Job in every human being. Make sure you're listening and ask the right questions before just jumping into the answers. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Good evening, Dr. Zacharias. My name is Nestor Soriano, and I just wanted to express my appreciation for your ministry. I've been following it for about 7 or 8 years. I'm a pastor in the Seventh-day Adventist Church and also a student at our seminary at Andrews University. In fact, we have many students from there. And my question is this. I'm sure that there are a variety of Christian denominations here. How do you explain to unbelievers the fractions within Christianity? And I'm speaking about the plurality of the denominations that we have within our own with our own system of belief within Christianity, when we are supposed to have an exclusive and united message.
Okay. I was at Michigan State University when it's on video. It's actually quite funny. A Muslim guy stood up and basically said to me, he said, you Christians have all these denominations and so on, it's because Jesus taught in parables, it's so inexact, and he went on and on and on. I said, we Christians have so many denominations? I said, my goodness, the Sunnis and the Shias and the Druze and the Ahmadiyas and the Sufis, and then he started laughing. I said, you've got all these groups. I said, you know why? Because any time in my worldview, in our worldview, if you have something that is genuine, you will always have something that is counterfeit. I said, so don't attack what we have to be, well, why we are so many groups. If you're going to attack the genuine and ask me what it is we believe, and I'll be happy to answer it. Now, in terms of the Christian denominational differences, the way I look at it is this. There are two errors you can make. One is an error in form, and the other is a corruption of substance. An error in form and a corruption of substance. Errors in forms are less serious, but corruptions of substance are very serious. And sometimes you may have these various expressions because personality-wise, some person may prefer a certain expression of worship. I'm much more a traditionalist type of guy. I was raised in the Anglican Church in Delhi, although I never listened to a word when I was there. But after I came to know the Lord, now I've got an Anglican prayer bench in my study. I get to my knees every morning. I read the prayer book and so on. I love all of that. I'm a traditionalist. Somebody else, maybe more of a happy-clappy type, they might enjoy that type of thing. And you know what? I speak in many of their churches, and when I sit on the platform, they just wonder, is this the guy who's going to speak to us? It's not my expression, but I allow the privilege of the person whose personality wants that kind of expression. That's a form. And if there are formal errors that are made, we can talk about it, we can discuss it. But where we really need to discuss is the substantive differences. Is there a corruption of substance? And if there is a corruption of substance, which principally applies to the person and the work of Jesus Christ, then you have to say, this person may call themselves a Christian denomination, but they've really departed from the historic Christian faith, and therefore that becomes a very serious corruption. So I say to people, if there are formal differences, we learn to live with it. Somebody might like this kind of soloist or music, that kind of worship and so on. God has created us with the diversity of personalities. But at the same time, we have to guard our doctrine. And that's when the differences may become serious. So I say you have to examine it on the basis of the historic Christian faith and what it particularly says about the person and the work of Jesus Christ.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I was just wondering if, very briefly, because you said you only have 20 minutes.
Yeah. Well, we'll just take these three and these three here. I'll keep my answers brief. Yeah.
I was just wondering if you could very briefly cover how exactly does Christianity line up with your 3, 4, 5? Because when you were explaining the three, it didn't seem as though Christianity really lined up with at least two of those.
Which one?
I know that it lines up with logical consistency, but the other two, which had to do with some bit of
Empirical adequacy and experiential relevance.
Okay, the last one it also applies to. The second one I question a little bit.
Sorry?
The second one I question a little bit.
Empirical adequacy? Okay, fair enough. You see now, that's fascinating that you would say that, and obviously it's coming from your heart and you think that way. When you look at the Quran, okay, take the Quran, take the Bhagavad Gita or the Vedas or something, or you take the Tripitakas of Buddhism, whatever, and you put the Bible next to it. There are so many key distinctives in the Bible over against the others. Hindus will describe their beliefs, many of them, as Hindu mythology. Many of their historic narratives are called mythology. They don't believe in the historicity of those things. They just believe these are stories made up. Some of them will say, how did Ganesh get his elephant head? And the story is, of course, of his father coming back and he got angry at a moment and vowed he would cut off the head of the first person that he saw, and unfortunately cut off his son's head. So the next thing he saw was an elephant. He cut off the elephant head and put it on top of his son, and that's how Ganesh became the Lord Ganesha, and so on. Now, some will say, well, yeah, there is a lot of truth to that. I don't understand it, but it's true. But many others will say this is all mythological. The Bible is a book of history. So it is verifiable. I remember many, many years ago reading in books on archaeology. I remember even going back and seeing that one of the criticisms that was made of the Passion of our Lord is that there is no reference to Pontius Pilate anywhere in any other place outside of the New Testament. How could somebody who actually made it into one of the creeds and then referred to as such a key figure in the crucifixion saga not mentioned anywhere else? Today, if you go to Tiberias, you'll see a huge stone with the marking of Pontius Pilate on it, and now the actual one is put in the shrine of the book, and the replica still remains out there. Now, what was happening at that point? The critic was saying, where's the empirical evidence for this kind of stuff? So that's the verifiable historic fact. And then the experiential relevance side of it, you have to talk about it, is that when you worship is fulfilling the ultimate longing in the human heart to bring together unity and diversity. Unity and diversity was what the Greeks hungered for. And so in the worship of the living God, the harnessing of the sacred that binds together all of the proclivities and all of the passions and desires you have, giving that the sacred underpinning, giving that the sacred cohesion, that's the coherence, that's the relevance that it brings. So that if you take, for example, sexuality in gay abandon, as it were, a la whatever you want to do, there is no meaning in its expression of it. But if you take sexuality in the binding, say, of the sanctity of marriage as given in the scriptures, it does become relevant. So there is both empirical measurement and personal relevance. But your point is fascinating in raising that, because in talking to people today, if you just talk truth without relevance, then you end up with something that is not connecting with the person's need.
I also misunderstood your empirical part to be empiricism, which is also a bit of that as well.
Which one is that?
Oh, I also misunderstood empirical to mean empiricism, which is
Oh,
a
okay,
bit
well,
different.
all right. Empiricism has empirical in it, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Good evening. Just also first, thank you for the work that you do. It means a lot. I study apologetics and I study theology, and I'm at a secular university. And I've heard you speak several times about travels and different people you talk with. One of the things that I come across is that in apologetics, as you study theology, there's this sense of sort of being weary of being on the defense as you live life. Every book I read, everything I encounter, every message that comes across is a little nick, and it moves you, and it changes perspective. And as you've traveled and as you've been all over the globe, and I remember you said something once, possibly you may recall it, that even just changing a location sometimes makes you doubt certain things. And I know for me and for a lot of Christians, there is this sense of being tired and weary of being on the defense. Where do we begin to address that?
Thank you for being very honest. And of course, the Bible alerts us not to get weary in well-doing. And in the book of Malachi, one of the last verses, it says, you've also snuffed at it and said, behold, what a weariness it is. This sense of emotional, spiritual, physical fatigue is very real. And in our line of work, we mainly go to hostile audiences. You're sort of seen as a dartboard when you come, and they're really there to get you. The most important thing I say to you is this: always feed your soul in a balanced way, not just the intellect. I read a man by the name of F.W. Borum, B-O-R-E-H-A-M. Until about a couple of years ago, I carried his books all the time and read an essay every day by Borum. Because Borum sees the sublime in the simple. He was a devotional writer. And I would always begin every day by reading a chapter from Borum, then go to the scriptures, and then my time of prayer. I'm hoping again, by the middle of the year, to pick that up once more. But I have read all of his 55 volumes, so I'm just taking a bit of a break in it and going to go back to it again. Find a way to feed your soul where you are being nurtured, not just intellectually, but in the devotional side of your life. The second thing I would encourage you to do, I have a group of 5 people, 4 men and 1 woman. 3 of them are on my board, 2 of them are friends, who are in my personal accountability group. I stay in touch with them regularly, share with them. One of them is here tonight. I just wrote to them recently. And what I am open to them about is If you see anything wrong with me, you need to correct me, please write to me, call me, say something. And Paul is here tonight. He lives in Chicago, and I write to them after meetings. I write to them when I'm struggling. I write to them when I'm making difficult decisions. And I think it's very important that those who love you hear from you and that you hear from them. Yeah, my family does. I have them, of course, my wife and my children. They are always my best friends. But I like to have a group of people to whom, when I'm heavy-hearted, I can write, say, please pray for me. And I'm just going into this meeting. I need some prayer. Please do that for me. Stand with me. So do some reading. Have people with whom you can stay in touch with in a close way. And then you have others who, incidentally, you just stay in touch with and get advice from. I would say to you, if your prayer life is guided every day with an undying discipline, and your reading is balanced, and your friends are there to stand with you, you will not always feel under attack. You will feel upheld. You will feel sustained. One of the things I ask my wife to do is, please don't send me into the lion's den back to back. You know, she takes all my bookings, and I don't like doing 2 or 3 university open forums back to back, because you come away saying, the whole world hates this, you know. It's not the way it is. But if you can go to a missionary conference after that and hear some wonderful stories, today I got a letter from my colleague Michael Ramsden, who's at Gordon College the last 2 days, and one of my colleagues, Bob Grinnell, is here, who is, 2 of them are here actually from my team who are with him. They say the meeting went on past midnight yesterday, and Michael got back to his room at 3:30 a.m., people coming to the front, repenting, broken with tears. My colleague from England wrote and said, you'd never believe what's happened at our meeting last night. And Michael sent those to me with the words, for your encouragement. It's good to get that, you know, and I say, wow, thank you, Lord. So don't get weary. You know, you may get weary in it, but don't get weary off it. And God's doing some things in the other parts of the world and many other parts of the world which will make you hold on to the rafters. You know, it's fantastic. Quickly, Tutu, thanks. Yeah. Yes, sir.
Hi, brother. I'm here on behalf of a very close friend back home who has recently walked away from the faith. And so I called him. I decided to give it a shot and just ask him, is there any question you'd like me to ask Ravi Zacharias tonight? Because he was very interested in you and studied some of your stuff. And so he said yes.
Thanks for doing that.
Yeah. He said the reason why, this is Tom speaking, why I walked away from the faith was that I started to wrestle with the fact that God chooses some and not others. And then I had to deal with it on a personal level, asking, what if God didn't choose me? And if we're doing evangelism, it's okay, Steve. God didn't choose that person, I guess. And so wrestling with that on a personal level with appreciation for the worth and the value of a human being. And so I started to, try to talk with him, but I don't know my stuff. And so I was wondering, I feel like I sense that this might be a different question, but that Tom has been kind of poisoned with this dichotomy between free will and God's sovereignty and choosing some and not others. And he's really wondering, do I have a choice? Do I have a choice to accept Christ? And so what would you say to Tom?
You're in the right place. You should enroll out here. You know what? I'll be happy to give you a 2 or 3 minute answer. And it's one of those answers, no matter what you say, somebody's going to hate you for it. But if you get onto our website, we give you articles and essays on both sides of the issue, to be fair. So I'll give you my simple answer to that, and I'm not sure it'll be fully satisfying to your friend. I actually have to wonder whether that's the real problem with him. I think it's just a symptomatic thing. I doubt it's the real problem. Like Oprah Winfrey said, she walked away from the faith when she heard her pastor preach a sermon on God being a jealous God. Really? That's why you walked away from the faith? You didn't even understand what the terms of an exclusive love really means and the nature of love and so on and so forth? Or was that just an excuse to walk away from certain, maybe other unanswered questions? So if it is of any comfort to your friend, at least take this approach. The Bible holds both of these points in tension without exclusion. It holds both of these in tension without exclusion. That which God had foreordained from before the foundation of the world, you with wicked hands have taken and crucified, the Apostle Peter. Apostle Paul, work out your own salvation, for it is God that worketh in you both to will and to do of his good pleasure. Jesus himself, offenses must come, but woe unto him through whom they come. There's a point in which these two are held in tension. And God, I think, purposely leaves us in the mystery of recognizing that without him, I would never make it, but he calls upon me to follow him. Okay. So you have to hold these two. You don't know where one ends and the other begins. I like Os Guinness's answer when we were in Atlanta together for an open forum, where he talked, I don't know if I'll say it as well as you do, Oz, but he quoted Francis Schaeffer at saying, if one holds to one and one holds to the other, and one holding to the other is ignoring the one, and one holding the one is ignoring the other, give them the opposite perspective of that's what they need for the moment, and give them that perspective to counterbalance the extreme to which they have gone. If one is holding totally to an absolute free will, you have to remind them of the sovereignty of God. If one is so clinging to the sovereignty of God that they claim no responsibility of the free will, you better remind them of the free will. So it all depends on the medication needed for the moment, because we know that both are true, and God in his mystery keeps us from knowing where one line ends and the other begins, but we know they are both there. No different to the incarnation, by the way. Very God of very God, very man of very man. Both are held together, and God leaves that divine mystery for us without, what was it Gabriel Marcel said? There's a difference between a problem and a mystery. Getting to Mars is a problem. Falling in love is a mystery. And he said, a mystery is a problem that encroaches upon itself. So for one to say, if I'm not chosen by God, then I'm not free, he's encroached upon the problem by freely saying that he is not free. So it's a mystery that pulls himself into the very dilemma. Keep them in balance. Tell your friend to get on. Actually, you can get a lot of books on the subject here. I think J.I. Packer's book, Evangelism and the Sovereignty of God, is one of the great all-time simple little books on that to take. Tell your friend we wish him well, and we hope one day he will know the sovereign God has called him to himself too. Okay?
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Zacharias. And we appreciate the work you do, especially in secular universities.
Yeah.
My question is, the Bible states that only God is immortal. God is
what?
Immortal.
Okay.
And when you read, let's say, New Age writings and Eastern writings, you find that one of the fundamental premise is that the soul also is immortal. And so there is this struggle to reach the soul. And so who are we as Christians to especially attack or question them, especially if we teach also that the soul never dies, that when a person dies, go straight to heaven?
The answer to that's very simple. They are mixing up two words. One is an uncreated entity, and the other is a created entity. There never was a time where God wasn't, but there is a time where that individual wasn't. And so to say that the soul lives on eternally is not therefore to say that the soul has existed through eternity. But that is true of God. It is not true of human beings. So there's a difference in the two categories there. Okay. Yep.
Good evening, sir. Looking back on your years of study, ministry, speaking to both friendly and hostile crowds, writing books and such, I think one of the other questions might have touched on this. What is the one piece of advice you would give to those who are following in your footsteps?
Wow. First of all, I hope they would choose somebody else's footsteps to follow. I'm serious. That is, they've got better people to follow. It's hard to reduce something so significant to one statement. So if you'll allow me the privilege of saying a couple of things. Number one is this. I said this, I think, the last time I was here, or the time before last. Calling and equipment are two different things. You can be gifted in a certain way, and if your calling matches your gift, it's a beautiful combination. If you go into a calling without a gift, it's miserable for you and the audience. If you just have a gift but with no calling, you're just wasting all that God has poured into you. So I would say identify the combination of the gift and your calling. It's very important. Your professors and your classmates will help you a lot in that. If they recognize a giftedness in you, they will encourage you and tell you to nurture that gift, to feed that gift, to develop that gift. And I can guarantee you, if you honor God in that gift, He will bring somebody into your path or a situation into your path where He leads you into His call and confirms it. But the second thing I would say to you is probably the most important thing I would say. Wherever He calls you, whatever He equips you with, if you don't have a humble spirit and a humble heart, you will squander or abuse what it is that God has given to you. This is, the old joke about the guy who said, I was going to speak on humility, but I'm going to save it for a larger audience. It's that kind of common malady. And I think this thing called hubris, pride, it's a deadly thing. I see it again and again and again. It's you just hope and pray that if anybody sees it in you, that they will caution you, or God, they will caution me, or say, that's not coming through well. It sounds a lot like a very confident, egotistical person. Then you have to take a step back and say, I'm sorry, I didn't intend it that way. Because this very voice that you have can go like that. Go like that. I think of Samuel Taylor Coleridge. My work in Cambridge for the brief stint I did there was in the Romantic Writers. Samuel Taylor Coleridge is a brilliant poet. He squandered it away with drugs and all of that till he couldn't write anymore. And he sat in his room one day desperately for an hour or two, hoping he could at least frame one stanza in the caliber that he was used to. And he put that quill down and wept, and he said, it's gone. Gifting can be squandered, and humility can plunder the soul. The lack of humility can plunder the soul. So I would say to you, be a humble person, find your gifting and calling, and use it for the glory of God, knowing it's all of Him. He just happens to have chosen you for that moment and that time. He could have called anybody else to do it. Okay. Last one.
Hi. I am a recent married person to my wife, Sarah. And I want to ask a question about prayer and devotionals. And so I've had a hard time with prayer and devotionals, just kind of getting in a good routine. And I'm a very committed Christian. I used to be a youth pastor for a time. And when we got married, I devoted myself to studying again, to classwork. And so I just want to know, how can I perhaps get a good balance in your view?
Good balance between?
Between having prayer and Bible study.
How long have you been married, you said?
4 months.
Wow. Story is told of the guy who flew his wife to Hawaii for the 25th anniversary. Somebody said to him, wow, for the 25th, what are you planning to do for the 50th? He said, fly her back. I'm going to get killed for that. No. As a matter of fact, in May is going to be my 40th. And when we came to Toronto, when we came to Trinity, we were newlyweds. We were married in 72 and we came to Trinity in 73. So we have some very happy memories here, Craig, and our little one was born while we were here. First of all, I want to say to you, outside of that relationship you have with Jesus Christ, the relationship you have with your wife is going to be the most important thing in life for you. She'll be your best critic. She'll be your best friend. And always be prepared to take her criticism, because many people will never tell you things that she alone will have the courage to tell you. And you must, if you're a youth pastor and you're up in front, you're going to say many a thing that probably you ought not to have said. And if she's the one who's telling you that, you better take it seriously. I would never have made it this far without a wife who's twice as committed to the Lord as I am, and I mean that very sincerely. So God bless you, and I wish you every success in your home and in your ministry. The balance between the Bible study, and the Word Bible study and prayer is very clearly impression and expression. You know, an expression of words without an input of ideas will lead to conceptual bankruptcy. You have to have an input coming in, and the Word of God is going to give you that input. The second thing I say to you is, however you form your prayer life, make it something that you guard. You must guard it, because there'll be many other things that'll invade that time for you. You know, I'm an early morning person. My wife's a late night person. She has her time in the evening with the Lord. I have my time early morning, and then of course when we're together we have our time. But I want to suggest to you that whether you're an early morning or a late night person, in the ministry, you better start your day with some time with the Lord. Because I find if I don't start it with the Lord that morning, I see Him through the world's eyes. If I started with Him, I see the world through His eyes. So I say to you, however you do it, and my way of suggesting it is that sometimes you start reading the Word and your mind is still half asleep. Use something else to wake you up. That's why I read Boram. He wakes me up. And then I go to the Word and I don't lose anything from that Word at all. He wakes me up, I get to the Word, and I get to my time of prayer. May I also suggest a hymn book or a songbook in the combination of that reading and prayer, so that you've got the imagination stirred and the music in your heart and the melody that you need to make unto the Lord. So keep it up. God bless you. It's wonderful you're starting out your life this way. Please forgive that joke. I just couldn't resist that. God bless you. Take care. Okay.
Well, I think we're all convinced that Ravi Zacharias is both called and gifted, and we are grateful to God for that. And we're grateful to you for being a good steward of that calling and that giftedness and sharing that with us tonight. And we'll look forward tomorrow morning of hearing more. At 11 o'clock, he'll be speaking on the topic, If the Foundations Be Destroyed. So I hope most of you will be able to be back for that. And then tomorrow afternoon at 3 p.m. with Oz Guinness. You know, I can't help but think, before we close, and we'll stand for prayer in a moment, that there may be some here who they've heard this and it sounds so too good to be true. And you're saying, how can that really be, that a person can come to know God in that kind of a way, with that kind of conviction and that kind of inner peace, and to really know God in this? How does that work with Jesus? And I would be sorry to see anybody go home without getting more answers to those kind of questions. And I know that some of us are here. Ravi will be here, I think, for a little while. And others of us would love to talk to you more. If you have that kind of a question, don't go home without getting that answered. So that's just an invitation to you to keep asking these questions and following up on these issues. Go to the webpage at rzim.org, I believe it is. You'll find all kinds of interesting information there, and videos and audio and so on and so forth. Well, will you stand with me, and let's close our evening in prayer. Our most gracious Lord, how very good it is to know that you are a God who has spoken into our world, that we are not left to grope on our own, and that you are a God who has acted, and your love became visible, tangible in the sending of your Son, to be born in a time and place, to be nailed to a real wooden cross, to be buried, and to truly in history be resurrected from the dead and to conquer death. And we thank you that he brings us life, and that this is true, and we can experience it, and you've confirmed it over and over again. And we thank you for what we've heard tonight. And we pray that you will keep us strong in seeking truth and seeking you and living for you. Help us to be those who can communicate clearly with others who are searching, who are asking questions. We thank you for your goodness in every way to us that we've experienced even on this evening. And now may you send us off with your grace and peace. Protect those who have long journeys ahead of them tonight. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.